what medieval people actually did at night. You think you have a bad relationship with sleep. You lie awake, staring at the ceiling, phone in your hand, quietly dying inside because it's 2 a.m. and you have to be up in 4 hours. Medieval people would look at you and say, yes, that's correct. That's exactly what's supposed to happen. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about the Middle Ages. The medieval night wasn't just the daytime with the lights off. It was a completely different world, different rules, different economy, different biology, different fears. And when the sun went down, everything changed. Let's start with the thing that will genuinely break your brain. Lighter. The two-sleep system. Medieval people did not sleep the way you sleep. They slept in 2 shifts, deliberately. This isn't speculation. This isn't a theory some guy made up on the internet. Historian Roger Eckhart spent 16 years going through medieval diaries, court records, medical texts, and personal letters from across 5 centuries and multiple countries. What he found, consistent across hundreds of independent documents, was this. Medieval people called it first sleep and second sleep, and everyone knew exactly what that meant. First sleep started at dusk. You went to bed when the sun went down, or close to it. You slept for 4 or 5 hours. Then you woke up, completely normally, on purpose. In the middle of the night, you stayed awake for 1 to 2 hours. Then you went back to sleep. That was second sleep. You woke up at dawn. That was the schedule for most of human history until about 200 years ago. Geoffrey Chaucer mentions the first sleep as a matter of course, no explanation, no clarification, because his audience knew exactly what he was talking about. Medieval medical texts recommended specific activities for the waking gap based on what was best for the humors. Court records from England and France occasionally note that someone witnessed something between sleeps. Not unusual, just accurate. The phrase disappeared from common use sometime in the 17th and 18th centuries. Industrialization imposed a single consolidated work schedule. Artificial lighting made it possible to push the day later and compress the night. And eventually, everyone forgot that humans ever slept any other way. Your tuum insomnia isn't a disorder. It's your body running a program nobody updated. So what did medieval people actually do in the gap? Some prayed. The church had been hammering, midnight is sacred, into everyone's heads for 1,000 years, so the pious used the gap for personal devotion. This was considered its proper use. Some talked to their spouses. Medieval households were crowded, extended families, servants, apprentices, sometimes animals all sharing the same space. The midnight gap was often one of the only genuinely private moments a married couple had. Some ate. Cold leftovers were a perfectly reasonable midnight meal. Some checked on their animals. In a society where livestock represented significant wealth, making sure your pig hadn't escaped or been killed by something in the night was worth a trip outside. And some, and medieval doctors wrote this down explicitly, in actual medical texts, had sex. Not from unusual energy, but because medieval medicine genuinely recommended the waking gap as the optimal time for conception. The body was rested, the humors were balanced, the mind was calm. This was the doctor's advice. It was considered scientific. The point is, waking up in the middle of the night was not a problem medieval people had. It was just Tuesday. The dream problem. While we're talking about what happened in the middle of the night, we need to talk about dreams, because medieval people did not think dreams were random. Modern people understand dreams as the brain processing information during sleep, noise, mostly, with occasional interesting patterns. Medieval people understood dreams as one of three things: a message from God, a trick from a demon, or a symptom of what was wrong with your body. None of these interpretations left you with the option of ignoring what you dreamed. The standard framework came from a late Roman writer named Macrobius, whose commentary on Cicero's Dream of Scipio became the go-to medieval reference on dream classification. He identified 5 types: the true prophetic vision, the symbolic dream requiring interpretation, the oracular dream where a figure directly tells you something, the nightmare as a demon or anxiety response, and the apparition, something seen in the half-awake state between sleep and waking. Medieval theologians argued about which category each dream fell into for centuries. The stakes were real. If your dream was genuinely prophetic, you were obligated to act on it. If it was demonic, you were in danger. If it was a symptom, you needed medicine. Saints' visions overwhelmingly occurred at night, during the waking gap or just before dawn. The hour of lauds, the pre-dawn prayer, was considered the most spiritually charged time in the whole day. The boundary between sleep and waking was where the divine most often broke through. The nightmare was not just a bad dream. It was a creature. The mare was a malevolent spirit, sometimes described as a woman, sometimes as a shapeless pressing weight that sat on sleeping people's chests and caused bad dreams and suffocation. Sleep paralysis described exactly. Medieval people put specific protective items under their pillows or hung them above the bed to ward the mare off. If you woke from the waking gap having had a vivid and disturbing dream, the correct move was to pray immediately, possibly to consult a priest, and to take seriously that something was trying to communicate with you or get to you. The medieval night was not just dark and cold. It was spiritually active. The curfew bell. But before any of this could happen, the day had to officially end. And in a medieval city, the day officially ended when the bell rang. The word curfew comes from the Old French couvre-feu, cover fire. That was the original instruction. When the bell rings, cover your hearth fire, bank your coals, don't leave anything burning unsupervised. This was not optional, because here is what medieval cities were made of: wood, almost entirely wood, packed tightly together, with open fires burning constantly inside every single building, with no fire brigade, with no running water beyond wells and rivers. When a medieval city caught fire at night, people died. A lot of people. Entire neighborhoods were gone by morning. This happened over and over in city after city across every century of the medieval period. The curfew bell was not bureaucracy. It was survival. In most cities, it rang at dusk, somewhere between 7 and 9 in the evening, depending on the season. And when it rang, you were expected to be inside. Fire covered. Door closed. If you were caught outside after curfew, you were immediately considered suspicious. Not, "Hey, what are you doing out here?" Suspicious. "We're detaining you right now." Suspicious. In many cities, being outside after curfew without a stated legitimate reason, midwife, doctor, urgent message for a nobleman, was enough to be arrested, fined, or in more extreme cases, beaten on the assumption that anyone wandering around in the dark was clearly up to something. The night watchmen were the ones enforcing this. And here is where it gets interesting. More. The night watch. Every medieval city of any size had a night watch. Men who patrolled the streets after dark, looking for fires, looking for criminals, looking for people who shouldn't be there. In theory, an imposing organized force maintaining order. In practice, we have the actual historical records. Night watch duty in most cities was compulsory, a civic obligation. Like jury duty, except you had to do it in the dark and cold, for no pay, carrying a torch that kept going out. Rotation systems pulled ordinary craftsmen, merchants, and tradespeople from their beds to walk the streets all night. They were not trained. They were not armed beyond whatever they personally owned. They were exhausted, resentful, and documented in multiple court records from London, Paris, and German cities, occasionally found asleep on their feet. In some cities, you could pay a substitute to do your watch duty for you. The substitutes were very old men, very young men, or men who desperately needed money. This tells you something about the service level. Medieval cities also had a policy called hue and cry. Witness a crime in progress, robbery, assault, anything, and you were legally required to shout for help and give chase. Everyone who heard the shout was legally required to join the pursuit. Think about what this means in practice. It is the middle of the night. You have just been woken from first sleep. Someone is screaming in the street. You are now legally obligated to run into pitch-black darkness, chasing a criminal you cannot see. And if you don't respond, you can be fined for failure to hue and cry. Medieval law gave you no good options. The darkness problem. Here is something modern people have never experienced and cannot fully imagine: total darkness. Not city is quiet dark. Not power is out dark. Total, complete, absolute darkness. No street lights. No glowing screens. No ambient light from neighboring buildings. On a cloudy night in a medieval city, you could not see your hand in front of your face. That was the default. Tallow candles, made from animal fat used by the poor, were dim, short-lived, and smelled like burning failure. Beeswax candles were better in every way and cost significantly more. They were for wealthy households, churches, and people trying to impress someone. For most medieval people, the working day ended at sunset not because they were lazy, but because there was nothing to see by. The candles available to them were not bright enough for fine work. They were barely bright enough to not walk into walls. Paris, one of the most sophisticated cities in medieval Europe, had no official street lighting until 1667, the 17th century, after the medieval period ended. Before that, if you wanted light on a Paris street, you carried it yourself. Some cities passed laws requiring wealthier residents to hang lanterns outside their doors on dark nights. This was enforcement by social embarrassment. It was not particularly effective. Medieval nights were governed by whoever was willing to carry a torch. Wealthy people moved through cities at night with servants carrying torches. The servants existed partly for light and partly as a social signal. This person has servants, do not rob them. In a wealthy nobleman's household, the evening itself looked very different. The great hall lit with candles and torches, feasts extending into the night, musicians and storytellers performing, the elaborate routines of aristocratic entertainment. The wealthy could afford to push darkness back. For everyone else, the door closed, the fire banked, and the night was mostly spent in it. What the church was doing at midnight. While everyone else was sleeping in shifts and trying not to set their houses on fire, The church was extremely busy. Medieval Christianity had a system called the canonical hours, 7 set times each day dedicated to collective prayer. They ran from dawn to after midnight, and they did not stop for night. Compline was the final prayer of the evening, said just before sleep. Then matins, also called nocturnes, the midnight prayer. In most traditions, this was the longest and most demanding of all the canonical hours. It involved rising from bed, filing into the cold stone church, and chanting through a demanding liturgical sequence that could last an hour or more, then lauds in the hours before dawn. For monks and nuns in religious communities, these were not optional. You got up at midnight, every night, for the rest of your life, and you went into the cold church and you prayed. In winter, this meant leaving a warm dormitory for an unheated stone building where you could see your breath. The candles barely helped. You were expected to be there, awake, reading and chanting, by the light of a few lamps. Medieval monks complained about matins. Constantly. We have the records. Letters between abbots. The midnight office is a trial to the brothers. Personal diaries noting that one monk had not slept properly since his ordination. Stories of a brother who had fallen asleep during matins and made a noise, as a pig that has found water. These were not serious scandals. They were the ordinary texture of monastic life. The bells calling the community to matins rang across the city. People who were not monks heard them. For the general population, following the biphasic pattern, the midnight bells often served as a natural signal for the waking gap. The church's schedule and the body's schedule had, over centuries, arrived at a rough alignment. The medieval church produced extraordinary literature, architecture, philosophy, and music. All of it was built by people who were woken up at midnight every night and made to sing. The night economy. Now, the curfew is rung. The watch is theoretically patrolling. The monks are in the cold church, being miserable. And in the back streets of every medieval city, business is booming. Medieval curfew was a rule. Rules in medieval Europe were observed by people who feared the consequences of breaking them, and ignored by people for whom the consequences of not breaking them were worse. Taverns officially closed at curfew. Many did not. The fines for running an after-hours tavern were real. So were the profits. In a city where the workforce started before dawn, bakers, market traders, craftspeople, a place to drink at midnight filled a genuine gap. We have records of medieval taverns being raided after curfew, fined, and then raided again 3 months later at the same address. The story of London's Southwark is instructive. Located just south of London Bridge, on the opposite bank of the Thames from the City of London, Southwark sat outside the city's legal jurisdiction. The Bishop of Winchester owned significant property there, and Southwark became the center of London's nighttime economy. Taverns, inns, theaters, and officially sanctioned brothels called the stews. The women who worked there were called Winchester geese because the bishop's office collected licensing fees. This was not a secret. This was civic policy. The church condemned prostitution. The church also collected money from establishments licensed to practice it. Medieval urban governance contained multitudes. Gambling dens operated at night. Markets in stolen goods. Informal moneylending. Underground betting on animal fights. The nocturnal economy of a medieval city was diverse, profitable, and entirely aware of the authorities. The medieval city at night was a second city. Same streets, different rules, different people, different economy. Every single night. Oh, the people nobody thanked. Here is a list of jobs that could only be done at night in medieval cities. Jobs without which everything collapsed. Jobs that appear almost nowhere in the historical literature celebrating medieval civilization. The gong farmers. That is not a euphemism. That is the actual title. Gong farmers cleaned cesspits. Medieval cities had no sewers in the modern sense. Human waste accumulated in pits beneath buildings and in designated waste areas. These pits had to be emptied regularly, or the city became uninhabitable, which medieval cities frequently were, by modern standards, but even medieval people had limits. Gong farmers were legally required to work only at night. The smell was considered too offensive for daylight hours. So they descended into pits in the dark, shoveled what was there into wagons, hauled it outside the city walls, and disposed of it. They were paid relatively well for medieval labor. This should tell you everything. They do not appear in the illuminated manuscripts celebrating knights and nobles. The bakers. Fresh bread for the morning market required the baker to start work at 2 or 3 in the morning. Ovens needed hours to reach temperature. Dough needed time to rise. The math was non-negotiable. Bakers across medieval Europe started their workday when most of the city was between first and second sleep. By firelight, in hot enclosed rooms, every day without exception. The midwives. Childbirth does not schedule itself. Midwives were summoned at all hours, walked through dark streets with their tools, and performed the most consequential medical function in medieval society by candlelight in someone's bedroom. Medieval midwifery manuals are practical, detailed, and matter-of-fact about the fact that you will be doing this at 3 in the morning. The fire watchers. The night messengers, the water carriers, the monks who we've established were awake and miserable. All of these people kept the medieval city alive while it slept. Warn. Fire, the thing that actually kept medieval people awake. The word curfew means cover your fire. Medieval cities' relationship with fire was the relationship of someone who lives in a house made entirely of dried grass and still insists on barbecuing indoors. Fire was how you cooked. Fire was how you heated everything. Fire was your only light. Fire was the complete infrastructure of warmth and survival. Fire was also going to kill you and everyone on your street if you weren't careful. A medieval house was timber. The roof was thatch or wood shingles. The neighbor's house was timber. They were packed close together because urban land was expensive, even in the 12th century. When fire started in a medieval city at night and wasn't caught within minutes, it didn't burn one house. It burned the block. We have records of major urban fires throughout the medieval period across England, France, Germany, and Italy. The pattern is consistent. Fire starts at night, when it's hardest to spot, spreads to neighbors before anyone wakes, and by the time the hue and cry goes up, the destruction is catastrophic. Whole quarters gone. Hundreds of homes. Thousands of people displaced overnight. Medieval firefighting was bucket brigades drawing water from wells, pulling down buildings adjacent to the fire to create a break, and prayer. That's the complete list. The rules around nighttime fire were not bureaucratic paranoia. They were the product of watching cities burn repeatedly over hundreds of years. Cover your fire. Bank your coals. Don't leave a candle near cloth. Every medieval urban person, had either seen a neighborhood fire themselves or heard the stories from people who had. The curfew bell wasn't just a curfew. It was a collective, inherited, cultural memory of what happens when someone gets careless. Outside the walls. Everything so far happened inside city walls. Outside was different in kind. At night, outside a medieval city, the road was dangerous in ways that are hard to fully communicate. Bandits operated at night. This is documented across the period in court records and chronicles. Organized groups targeting travelers, merchants, lone riders. Traveling after dark without armed escort was considered reckless. Many people simply didn't, waiting at inns for dawn, regardless of urgency. Wolves were a real threat. Not metaphor, not fairy tale. Wolves in medieval Europe were present, hungry, and not afraid of people the way modern wolves are. Encounters appear in sources from across the period, not as legend, but as reported events with locations and dates. And beyond the wolves, there was what everyone genuinely believed was out there. Medieval people understood the night as spiritually active. Demons were most powerful in darkness. The souls of the unbaptized dead and the improperly buried walked at night. The wild hunt, a supernatural procession of the dead, appearing in various forms across German, Scandinavian, English, and French folklore, rode through the sky on specific nights. Encountering it was deadly. These weren't fairy tales people told to children. They were the framework adults used to explain why terrible things happened at night. Something killed the livestock. Someone vanished on the road. A disease came through the village. Without germ theory, without forensic investigation, without any scientific model for random disaster, the supernatural was the most rational explanation available. If you believe demons walk the night roads, you have no torch, you have no escort, and your neighbor died of something unexplained last month. You stay inside. Medieval people were not superstitious cowards. They were making reasonable risk assessments given available information. What they could see. One thing. For all the darkness. For all the fear. For all the fire risk and the criminal economy and the gong farmers in the pits and the monks in the cold church. Medieval people could see the stars. No light pollution. None whatsoever. On a clear night in a medieval city, you could see the Milky Way. Not a faint smudge near the horizon. A river of light across the entire sky, dense and overwhelming, bright enough to read by in old tales. Medieval people navigated by stars. Sailors crossed oceans by stars. Farmers tracked the agricultural calendar by stars. Pilgrims oriented themselves by stars. The night sky was not background scenery. It was a working document that everyone could read. We have medieval astronomical manuscripts of genuine sophistication. We have records of farmers, craftspeople, and common people tracking constellations with real attention. The sky was public, shared, and meaningful in ways it has almost entirely ceased to be for modern urban populations. We built a civilization of electric light. We gained the ability to work at any hour. And we gave up the only version of darkness that was actually magnificent. The full picture. So here is what the medieval night actually was. It was the city shutting one face and opening another. The legal economy went dark, the illegal one lit up. The pious prayed in cold churches, the sinners drank in back rooms with covered lanterns. The wealthy moved through streets with servant-held torches. The poor sat in total darkness and talked and listened and slept in shifts. The monks were awake at midnight. The bakers were awake at 2. The gong farmers were in the pits. The watchmen were, hopefully, on patrol. The midwives were in someone's bedroom. And in every house, someone was in the gap between first sleep and second sleep, praying or talking or lying still, and watching thoughts move through the dark. Dreams arrived and were taken seriously. Demons were considered present and active. Stars were visible and used. Fires were feared and managed. The bells marked every hour. Medieval society did not stop at night. It transformed. Everything that couldn't happen in daylight, the transactions, the intimacy, the crime, the prayer, the maintenance work nobody wanted to see, the dreams nobody wanted to ignore, all of it happened in the dark. The medieval night was not a void. It was a city within a city, running on parallel rails, lit by fire, governed by bells, populated by everyone and everything that didn't fit into the daytime world. And it ran every single night, without interruption, for 1,000 years. Next time you wake up at 2 a.m. and can't get back to sleep, you're not broken. You're just running the old schedule. If you found this interesting, subscribe. Next week, we're going somewhere that will make this look like a pleasant evening.